Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe to the channel to stay updated with our latest stories. From the outside, Sophia had it all: a stunning home, designer gowns, and a husband who moved through the world like he owned it. Victor was charming, powerful, a man people respected and feared in equal measure. When he chose her, it felt like a fairy tale spun into reality. But within weeks of their wedding, the shimmer faded. The estate she now called home felt less like a sanctuary and more like a stage. Every room was curated for perfection, every interaction with Victor carefully measured, formal, cold. He provided everything, except affection.
Except presence.
Sophia became the perfect wife in public, the polished ornament at his side, but behind closed doors, she was alone. He worked late, traveled often, and when he was home, he treated her more like an accessory than a partner. Her voice echoed in empty rooms, unanswered. And yet, she told herself it was enough, that love could grow from structure, from security. But something in her heart began to wither. She started to feel like a guest in her own life, invisible behind glass walls. The silence of her new world didn't bring peace. It brought a question that haunted her nightly: is this really all there is? The estate was breathtaking, an architectural masterpiece nestled on a secluded hillside, with sprawling gardens, fountains that whispered, and windows that caught the sun like crystal. But to Sophia, it felt like a cage lined with silk. From the moment she stepped through its towering front doors, she sensed it: the stillness wasn't peaceful, it was hollow. The rooms, though stunning, echoed with absence. The chandeliers sparkled, but there was no warmth in their glow. The marble floors gleamed, but each step she took felt like a reminder of how small she was in a life far too grand, too curated, too distant. Victor was rarely home, and when he was, the house seemed even colder. They exchanged pleasantries like business partners. He'd ask about her day without looking up from his phone, compliment her dress as if it were part of a checklist. The staff moved like ghosts, polite but distant, never truly acknowledging her beyond a nod. Sophia spent her afternoons wandering hallways, running her fingers along the walls as if they might suddenly open and offer her something real. At night, she would stand on the balcony, staring at the city lights below, feeling more like an ornament in Victor's collection than a woman with a voice, a mind, a heartbeat. The silence pressed against her like glass, transparent, inescapable. In a house full of beauty, she had never felt so unseen. And as the days blurred, one truth settled deeper into her bones: this was not a home. It was a performance. He appeared without warning, like a shadow slipping into the light. Sophia had been descending the staircase when she saw him, leaning casually against the banister at the landing, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Ethan.
Victor Son.
She'd heard his name in passing, always laced with irritation or sighs.
The rebellious one. The wild cat.
But nothing could have prepared her for the actual man standing before her now. He was striking in that sharp, quiet way, tall, composed, dark eyes that held stillness and storm all at once. There was nothing boyish about him, despite being only a few years younger than her. He studied her, not with curiosity, but with calculation. It wasn't the gaze of a stranger meeting someone new, it was the gaze of someone already trying to decide what kind of person you were, and how quickly you could be broken. Victor introduced them with a casual, almost forced cheer. "Sophia, this is my son, Ethan." Ethan's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile.
"So, you're the new Mrs.
Hayes." The way he said it made her breath catch. There was no warmth, only a cool amusement, like he was watching a game unfold that he already knew the ending to. Sophia forced a smile, extended her hand. "It's nice to meet you." Ethan didn't shake it. He just looked at her a second too long before turning away. And in that moment, she felt it, something shift. Something dangerous. Something beginning. Victor's absence became a rhythm Sophia never asked for, but quickly learned to live with. Mornings began with the scent of his cologne lingering on the sheets, a half-drunk cup of coffee cooling beside the untouched newspaper, and his voice fading into a Bluetooth headset as he disappeared through the front door. Evenings ended with his late returns, if he came home at all, offering her a kiss on the cheek like a formality, a faint smile, a murmured long day before retreating to his study. At first, Sophia tried to fill the silence. She organized dinner parties, redecorated rooms, wandered the garden with a glass of wine and thoughts too heavy for their beauty. But no matter how hard she tried to breathe life into the house, it remained still. Lifeless. It was in that silence that Ethan began to echo louder. His glances across the room, the flicker of interest beneath his cool exterior, they were not invitations, but challenges. Where Victor was distant, Ethan was present. Watchful. There, in the places where Victor had left space. Sophia told herself it was nothing. That Ethan's intensity was simply part of his nature, a guardedness she'd eventually learn to ignore. But deep down, she began to crave that attention. Not because it was right, but because it reminded her she still existed. She didn't want Ethan. Not really. She just didn't want to feel invisible anymore. And that, she feared, might be the very reason he saw her in the first place. It started innocently, as these things often do. A shared glance in a quiet hallway. A comment, too clever to be casual, tossed over Ethan's shoulder as he passed her in the garden. Sophia tried to ignore it, to pretend that nothing in her stomach twisted when he spoke, that her pulse didn't stutter when she found him already seated at the long dining table, watching her with that unreadable expression. One evening, she stepped out onto the balcony, the city lights sprawling beneath her like a dream too big to touch. The air was cool against her skin, a small mercy in a world that had grown so rigid. She closed her eyes, just for a moment, until she heard the soft click of the balcony door behind her. Ethan. He didn't speak right away. Just stood there, his presence a quiet weight beside her. You don't look happy, he said finally, voice low, even. She laughed, soft and bitter. That's a dangerous assumption. Maybe, he replied. But I'm not wrong.
Sophias Brit kaukt.
She didn't want to answer, didn't trust her own voice. But Ethan didn't push. He simply looked at her, not with judgment, but understanding. And in that charged, silent moment, something shifted between them. It wasn't a confession, or even a betrayal. Not yet. It was recognition. Of loneliness. Of longing. Of two people standing too close to a line neither of them should cross. And yet both already leaning toward it. From that moment on, something unspoken danced in the spaces between them, charged, subtle, impossible to ignore. Sophia became hyper-aware of Ethan's presence in every room, every corridor. His footsteps approaching behind her made her breath hitch. A brush of his hand against hers at the dinner table left her fingers tingling long after the moment had passed. These weren't coincidences anymore. They were collisions, small, electric, and deliberate. She told herself it was nothing. That he was Victor's son. That she was his wife. That this was a game of proximity, not attraction. But when their eyes met, across the room or across the silence, it felt like they were the only two people who understood that this house, for all its beauty, was hollow. And Ethan, he never said anything inappropriate. Never crossed a visible line. But it was the way he lingered in doorways when she entered, the way he'd glance back as he left a room, as if daring her to follow. He never touched her again, he didn't have to. His words were careful, but his gaze said everything. Sophia started to avoid him, pretending not to notice him watching. But it wasn't avoidance, it was delay. The house began to feel smaller. The air thicker. Every hallway, every stairwell became a question. Would he be there? Would she want him to be? It wasn't an affair. Not yet. But it was the spark that lit the fuse. And both of them, knowingly, were holding the match.
The rain came down hard that night, pounding against the windows like a warning.
Thunder rolled over the hills as if echoing something unspoken in Sophia's chest. She curled up on the living room couch, a book open in her lap, its words unread and forgotten.
The fire crackled weakly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the ornate walls.
Victor was out of town, again. The estate was silent, too silent, and the storm outside only amplified the hollowness within. She nearly jumped when she heard the sound, footsteps, soft and steady, moving through the hallway behind her. Before she could even stand, Ethan appeared in the doorway. His shirt clung to him, damp from the rain, his dark hair tousled, his expression unreadable but intense. "You're up late," he said, stepping into the glow of the firelight. Sophia swallowed. Couldn't sleep. Storm? She shook her head, but the lie hovered between them. No, it wasn't the storm outside that kept her awake, it was the one inside her. Ethan's gaze lingered on her for a breath too long.
You look different, nicht.
Something in his voice made her skin flush. And then he crossed the room. Slowly. Intentionally. He sat beside her, not too close, but close enough that she felt the pull, the gravity of everything they hadn't said. Their hands were inches apart on the couch cushion. And when his fingers brushed against hers, barely like a whisper, Sophia didn't move. She didn't want to. The air was thick with something unspeakable, heavier than the storm that raged beyond the windows. Sophia's breath came shallow as Ethan's fingers hovered near hers, barely touching, an invitation, a question, a dare. She should have pulled away. She knew it. Her mind screamed reason, loyalty, morality. But her body, her heart, responded to something else entirely, the undeniable pull of someone who saw her. And then it happened. Neither of them spoke, but something shattered in the silence. Ethan leaned in, slow and careful, as if waiting for her to stop him. But she didn't. Her eyes searched his face, not for hesitation, she already knew it wasn't there, but for absolution, something to make the moment feel less dangerous, less inevitable. Their lips met softly at first, tentative. But when she didn't pull back, it deepened. Desperation surged between them, two people drowning in a house of glass, finally breaking through the surface. His hands found her waist, pulling her closer. Hers tangled in the collar of his damp shirt. The kiss was reckless, electric, an unraveling of every wall they'd tried to keep between them. When it ended, they sat breathless, the fire flickering between them as if unsure whether to burn brighter or go dark. Sophia looked away first. Guilt slammed into her like a tidal wave. But beneath it, deeper and more dangerous, was something else. Not regret. Want. And that terrified her far more than the kiss ever could. The morning after, Sophia stared at her reflection, searching for signs of what she had done, some mark, some irreversible stain, but there was nothing. Her face looked the same. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders. But something inside her had shifted, something she couldn't unfeel. She told herself it was a mistake. One night. A moment of weakness. She could pretend it hadn't happened, bury it beneath the silence of the estate and the distance she would now maintain. But when she saw Ethan again, passing her in the hall, lingering near the library doorway, watching her over the rim of his coffee cup at breakfast, she knew it hadn't been a one-time trespass. It was a beginning. The tension between them was no longer subtle. Their conversations, when they happened, were laced with restraint, words chosen too carefully, silences too long. And yet, when the house was quiet and Victor was gone, they would find each other. In corners dim with shadow. In stairwells steeped in stillness. Every kiss was a denial turned surrender.
Every touch, a secret promise.
Sophia would tell herself it was the last time, every time. She'd whisper it in the dark, to him, to herself. But neither of them believed it. It wasn't just about desire anymore. It was about feeling, something she hadn't felt in years. And with each stolen moment, each reckless breath, she felt herself falling further, into Ethan, into guilt, into something she knew couldn't last, but couldn't let go. The first sign came quietly. A glance from Victor that lingered too long. A question asked with an edge she hadn't heard before. "Did you see Ethan today?" He'd ask over dinner, as casually as one might comment on the weather, but his eyes didn't match the tone. Sophia's fork would pause midway to her lips, her smile tight. Briefly, she'd reply, careful, measured. Victor had always been emotionally distant, absorbed in his empire of business and power. But lately his absence was sharper, because now when he was present, he was watching. She felt it in the way he entered a room with silence instead of greetings. In the subtle shift of his posture when Ethan joined them at the dinner table. In the way his fingers tapped once, twice, on the rim of his wine glass when no one was speaking. The house grew heavier with each day. What had once been a hollow silence was now brimming with something volatile, suspicion. Ethan noticed it too. His glances became more cautious, his presence more fleeting. He avoided being alone with her in the open. Their stolen moments were fewer, shorter, more desperate. The thrill of secrecy was now tainted by the awareness of danger. Sophia tried to act normal, smile, laugh, play her role. But she could feel the ground shifting beneath her heels. Victor was many things, but he was not a fool. And the question that haunted her more than anything was no longer if he knew. But how much? It happened with terrifying calm.
No accusations.
No shouting. Just a quiet moment at the dinner table when Victor set down his fork, folded his hands, and looked directly at Sophia with unreadable eyes.
The kindly light flickered between them, casting long shadows on the walls.
I know, he said. 2 words. That was all. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, the world stopped. Her heart pounded so violently it echoed in her ears. She didn't ask what he meant, she knew. And from the way Victor's gaze flicked briefly to Ethan, then back to her, she understood the depth of that knowing. Ethan didn't speak. His posture stiffened, jaw clenched, but he remained still. Sophia could feel the heat rising beneath her skin, her limbs frozen. Victor took a slow sip of wine. I don't need to hear your version. Not tonight. His voice was smooth, distant, as if commenting on a stock report, not the betrayal sitting across from him. She wanted to say something, an apology, an explanation, a plea, but her mouth wouldn't move. There was nothing left to defend. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was annihilating. Then Victor stood, collected his jacket, and walked away without another word.
No threats. No confrontation.
Just quiet devastation. And somehow that was worse. Because anger could be survived. But this aching, suffocating void he left behind, felt like the true punishment. Sophia knew in that moment, nothing in the house would ever be silent again. The next morning, the estate felt unfamiliar, like the very walls had absorbed the truth and were waiting for someone to scream it. Sophia wandered through the halls like a ghost, her steps quiet, calculated.
Victor hadn't come home the night before.
Or maybe he had, and she'd simply never heard the door. That terrified her more. In the conservatory, Ethan found her. His eyes were rimmed with shadows, his jaw tight, his usual confidence buried beneath something raw. We can't stay here, he said, voice low. We've done enough damage. Sophia looked at him, her throat dry. And then what? We just leave? His gaze didn't waver.
Wie Summe wäre.
Start over. But the words, as freeing as they should have sounded, struck something hollow inside her. Run away.
Abandon the ruins of a waiting Tightroken.
It felt romantic, impulsive, and utterly impossible. I don't know who I am without this house, she whispered. Without Victor, without guilt. Ethan stepped closer, gently taking her hands.
I know who you are.
You're the woman who finally allowed herself to feel. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to fall into that promise and never look back. But there was a fracture inside her, between the woman she'd tried to be and the one she was becoming. So she said nothing. And when he stepped away, when he turned and walked out of the room, she didn't follow. Not because she didn't want him, but because she didn't know if wanting was still enough. Days passed, though they felt more like fragments of time than full hours. Sophia wandered the estate as though it no longer belonged to her, if it ever had. The silence was no longer empty, but bruised. Victor had returned, but not to her. They coexisted like strangers inside the same beautiful prison, exchanging only what was necessary, each word a thread unraveling what remained. Ethan was gone. Just like that.
No goodbye.
No final glance.
Only the echo of his absence pressed into every room he had once stood in. Then one morning she found it, an envelope resting quietly on the piano bench, addressed in Ethan's familiar, angular handwriting. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. I won't ask you to follow me. You've already given up enough. But I need to know, if all of this was wrong, then why did it feel like the only time either of us was truly alive? Her breath caught as the weight of his words settled into her chest. The question lingered, aching and merciless. She stood at the window, the morning light spilling across the floor like forgiveness she hadn't earned. Below, the garden bloomed, untouched by the chaos they had created. She pressed the letter to her chest, unsure if it was a goodbye, or an invitation. She didn't know where Ethan was, or if she'd ever see him again. But one truth clung to her now, clear and devastating. Some fires don't burn out. They simply wait. In today's fast-paced world, it's easy to mistake silence for peace and stability for fulfillment. But emotional neglect, even in a relationship that seems perfect on the outside, can quietly erode the core of who we are. If you find yourself feeling invisible, unheard, or starved for connection, don't bury it. Speak up.
Have the hard conversations before longing turns into temptation.
Affairs rarely begin with passion, they begin with absence. True intimacy requires presence, attention, and honesty. If you're not getting that, ask for it. And if you're giving that to someone else, notice when they start to fade from themselves.